Linguistics Behind the Scenes.
What you always wanted to know about language and how to explore it.
With Christina Sanchez-Stockhammer.
And Dominic Piazza.
Hi everyone, welcome back.
Welcome back to Linguistics Behind the Scenes.
Yeah, and we are so happy to be back as always. Christina, well, I've said your name a lot during our time here on the podcast, but I don't actually know what your name means. I mean, we talk a lot about the etymology of words, but what about the etymology of names?
Yeah, that's true. Names also have an etymology. I mean, my name, as one might guess, means Christian or follower of Christ. Mm-hmm. And Christ means the anointed one. What about your name, Dominic?
Yeah, a bit similar with the Christian meaning. I believe it means belonging to the Lord. I've also heard it might mean he who was born on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Probably because, Sunday in other languages is like domingo or dimanche. So I think it's probably connected. I was not born on a Sunday. I was born on a Thursday. Oh, well. But still very interesting nonetheless.
Absolutely. Names, they have meaning. If you look at the history of the names, for example, Sophie, it means wisdom. I think that's a very beautiful meaning for a name. But when you use names in everyday language, they don't really have a meaning according to some linguists. They just have reference. Now that might sound strange at first sight because, if I use the word or the name Dominic, then I'm referring to you, obviously. So, in what way is that not a meaning? But I mean, meaning is rather something like when I would describe that a glass is a container that you can use for drinking. But I can't really say a Dominic is a kind of person who, because I mean, there's no quality that all Dominics would share. So for that reason, we can't say that the names have meaning, but they just refer to someone. So in that case, Dominic, or particularly Dominic Piazza, refers to you.
Right. And of course, when it comes to, our given names, which are our names that our parents give to us when we're born, maybe sometimes they pick it because they like the meaning. I have a feeling, though, other times they pick it because they like the way it sounds, which is perfectly valid. If you're going to be saying it and hearing it, then you want a name where you really like the way it sounds. And you also mentioned family names, which family names are almost different, right? Family names kind of have their own history and etymology, separate from given names. And that can be really fun because if you can trace the history of your family name, you can trace the history of your family and your ancestors. There's actually a really interesting situation in Japanese where in Japanese you could have the name. Let's say it's Michiko. That's the name that you want to give your child. You can then choose as a parent which Chinese characters you want to use to construct that name. And you pick the characters based on if they have a meaning that you wish upon the child, like it could be beauty, it could be wisdom, or what have you, and you get to kind of pick the individual Chinese characters you want, so long as those characters create the sound of Michiko in this example. And I found that when talking to Japanese people, a way to charm them quite quickly is to ask them what the characters of their name means. And very often they'll go off and say, oh, well, my parents had these hopes and dreams for me. They gave me this name. They gave me this because this character means this and this character means this. Often they're very passionate about their names.
And I also heard that it's sometimes possible for people to use different characters when they kind of grow older. It might be that they want to use a different character because it sounds the same but has a different meaning. Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of that, but it would make perfect sense to me. That would make perfect sense to me as long as the character still makes the same sound when spoken. Then because that's kind of the thing about languages like Japanese and Chinese, that the character as a picture has a meaning separate from how you say it, which is kind of hard for us to understand here in the West because we don't have that. But it's really cool. It creates these really cool opportunities for names that we don't have.
Yeah, but then, I mean, we also have a lot of opportunities for names. I mean, particularly in the English language, sometimes you have the impression that almost anything can become a name for a child. Wednesday, Apple, Hope.
Yeah.
We're far more restricted in German there. We don't have so many names that are identical with common nouns.
Yeah. I've heard this is a particularly maybe common trend in places like Hong Kong, where because of the history of it was a British colony, everyone has, their Cantonese name, their Chinese name, but then oftentimes they'll also have an English name that they might use in Western international contexts. And Hong Kongers are a little bit peculiar in that often the names they choose are a little bit unconventional. Yeah, names like Apple and things like that, which is quite amusing from the outside, but I love it. That's their tradition.
Yeah, but I mean, even some film stars in the United States, I mean, they call their children Apple or North. And other names that are quite unusual from a German perspective. Actually, in Germany, it's not so easy to give your child a special name. I mean, we have a certain stock of names like Christina and Dominic, etc., which you could use in German. But then, of course, sometimes people come along and want to have a completely new name, and then, administration has to decide whether that name is possible for a child or not, whether, for example, that name would make the child's life more difficult in the future, and then it's forbidden. So some names haven't been accepted.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like, at least in the legal sense, there are restrictions on what you can legally name your child. I mean, you're welcome to call them whatever you want, but in terms of what it actually says on the birth certificate, on the legal documents, different countries have different restrictions. Yeah.
I mean, there's some names that have been accepted that are very unusual, which I was surprised that they accepted them. For example, Schneewittchen, Snow White. So that's a name that you could give to your child. I mean, not everywhere. I think they decide that individually in the different places. Or, for example, Aphrodite. I mean, that's also unusual. I mean, but still, it's possible. Or San Diego. Yeah, in that case, it's a combination of two existing names, namely San and Diego. Yeah. And you can combine these to, produce a place name. And I mean, if you think about Paris Hilton, whose child is called Phoenix, that makes total sense. So wanting to have certain place names that remind you of beautiful episodes in your life. But it's not something that you have commonly. I mean, other things were toned down. For example, Superman. So you can't call your child Superman in German, or Excalibur or Gucci. So it's not possible to use some company's name or a second name, a family name. But you can't, for example, use princess or lord because that would be a title. So there are things that are okay and others are not.
Fascinating. Yeah, and this would be different depending on each country, but I would think there are probably some broad commonalities. Okay, very, very, very interesting. Well, names, we give our children names because, we want to kind of impart something on them, right? Our wishes for them, our love for them, our hopes for them. And maybe even a piece of ourselves as well, if there was just always a name that you really liked. But it is pretty clear that baby names are, to a degree, influenced by trends or pop culture, right? Because some names come into fashion and fall out of fashion with time.
Yes, totally. I mean, I don't know what it's like for the United States or for the world in general, but I mean, in German, there are some names. When I hear those names, I will know that people are from a certain generation. Yeah. So if someone is called Hedwig or Gertrud, then most likely they are elderly ladies, Oh, yeah. But things are changing again. So a few years ago, I would have assumed that Emma, for example, is also the name of an old lady. But in recent years, there have been a lot of Emmas in Germany. So it's a very popular name now. And it seems that the names of the grandparent generation are now also used again for the children.
Everything comes full circle. It's a cycle. Yeah. It's a cycle. It would be fun to measure this. But actually, people do measure it. But when I was in Germany, I met a lot of Emmas, young, like people who were my age. So it definitely seems to be back in full force. And like you said, the best example I can think of is, let's say, Jennifer. Jennifer, it seems, was a really, really popular baby name in the 1970s during in the US, kind of during the Woodstock era, the Summer of Love. Very, very popular. And so I think the vast majority of Jennifers are, by today, probably middle-aged women. So when I hear that name, I kind of expect to see a middle-aged woman because that's the trend. But of course, you can find young Jennifers, although I feel like I rarely see them. But I met one in Germany. That was cool. Yeah. I also met a Jason in Germany.
Oh, where did you meet them?
At the university that I was working at. And actually it was funny because they say, "Oh, my name is Jason, my name is Jennifer." And I'd say, "Oh, that's a nice English name." They say, "What do you mean it's an English name? What do you mean?" I don't think it's an English name. I'll say, "Well, it certainly must be because it has the j sound, and the j sound does not exist in German."
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not something we traditionally have, but we have those names. And actually, they were very, very popular during a certain period. I mean, I think particularly like the 1990s in the east of Germany.
Well, that would make sense. Because I was in the east of Germany talking to a lot of people born in the late 1990s. So that would make sense.
Yeah. And I mean, we have those fashions. I mean, and sometimes it's because there's a very popular film or film star. I mean, there was one time during which we got a lot of Kevins in Germany. Yeah. I mean, before that time, Kevin was completely unknown. But then there was the film Home Alone. And Kevin Costner was a very, very popular actor. And all of a sudden, plenty of Kevins were born. And that was a certain time. That was a certain fashion. And I mean, if you're interested in seeing those trends and how they develop, there are different websites on the internet. One that I sometimes use is thinkbabynames.com, where you can see the development across time and how popular your own name is. And I would assume that mine probably isn't so common at the moment.
I love those websites. Yeah, it has all of the records of like baby names throughout time, and you put in your name, and it will try to guess what year you were born based on the trends. And for me, it gets within like a year or two, I think. So my name, I think around the time I was born, Dominic must have been a very popular name, or at least more popular than it is now. So but Christina, we talked a lot about given names, which are very, very important. But, when it comes to family names, I grew up in an area with a very large Latino community, lots of Spanish speaking bilingual classmates in school. And a lot of them had hyphenated last names. They had two last names. And for the longest time, I didn't understand why. I didn't know what it meant. And I later learned that actually it's the Spanish tradition that you get two last names. You get your father's family name and your mother's family name.
Yeah, like the first name that they have, because each person kind of transmits their first surname to the next generation. So this is very common, but actually in Spain, it's not usually hyphenated. So in Spain, you would rather write them with a space in between. So, for example, López García, so these would be two names, and so everyone has two surnames, whereas in Germany this is very unusual. So in Germany, usually as a child, you just have one surname, one family name.
Exactly, and I would think in the kind of the Anglo tradition, that's usually the case as well. Usually in the US, I think they are these family names are hyphenated because they want to emphasize that it's a single unit. Because otherwise, if there's a space in between, then someone might think it's your middle name. Now, Spanish speakers would not get confused by this because they know better. But maybe English speakers who don't have familiarity with Spanish, they might not be able to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, it's a bit similar in in German, because in German you can also have a double surname. I mean, my own surname is the best example, Sanchez-Stockhammer. So it also consists of two parts. But in Germany, this double surname is usually the result of marriage. So when you get married, then you can take over, you can add your spouse's family name to your own and then have a combination. But, well, we've talked before about German compounds. So in Germany, we also like to show the unit status of words. And for that reason, we hyphenate them. So that's why there's a hyphen between my two surnames when they're spelled the German way. But of course, when you have a Spanish surname, then usually this is not the case, except, well, in Spain, some of the surnames are identical with given names or first names. For example, Martin, which is Martin.
Yeah.
You know, Martin can be a first name. It can also be a family name. And in that case, you would also, if you were called Martin Lopez as a family name, you would use a hyphen just to show that the Martin here is not the middle name.
Okay, yeah. So hyphenating it is not totally unheard of in Spanish-speaking societies. Very good to know. Very good to know. And I also want to highlight the Portuguese tradition. The Portuguese tradition is very similar, except it's flipped. In the Spanish tradition, that the father's last name comes first, and then the mother's last name. In the Portuguese tradition, the mother's family name comes first, and then the father's family name. And this, of course, carries over to Brazil as well. So Brazil and Portugal observe this tradition, which I think is, really interesting, just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, of course, it means that in Spain, of course, you have the family name or part of the name of your father and of your mother, but in the next generation, only the paternal line is conserved. But actually, these days, you can also choose what order you want to have for your children. So you can actually also turn it around now. So it's no longer exclusively the case that the father's name is passed on. But it's not automatic like in Portuguese, like you just mentioned. Right.
Yeah, traditionally, at least in Western societies, usually the father's family name is the one that gets passed down. But that has been changing. That has been changing in recent times. So watch this space. It's actively evolving. And with this topic of like family names being hyphenated or having a space, given names can also have a space or be multiple words. It's not so common, but it can happen. For example, my aunt, actually, if I'm being technical, she's my great aunt because of the relation. Like you have a great grandpa or a great grandma. But I always love great aunt because I'm sure if I called her my great aunt, she would say, "You're right, Dominic, I am a great aunt." But
I love that.
But so her name is Mary Ann. I think that originally it was Mary Ann as two words, because I think that might be traditional. But she grew very frustrated because people would think her name is Mary, and that maybe Ann is her middle name. So I think she actually went and had it changed, and she had it combined into one single solid word, one single solid name, Mary Ann, one name.
That makes total sense to me. I mean, because she wants to show that this is her complete name. It's not Mary, it's not Anne, it's Mary Ann. And that's actually what characterizes those complex first names. That you can say that it's a combination like Rosemary or for example, in German, Hans-Jörg, that's also a relatively common combination, or Annalena, Mary Lou. And in all of these cases, what happens is that you have a name, a complex name, which consists of two parts, and still you need the whole thing to refer to that person. So in a certain way, this is a bit like some special kind of compound, so Dvandva compounds, because there you can say, for example, Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary is Austria and Hungary combined. But you can't say it's a type of Austria or it's a type of Hungary. So it has to be the whole thing. And it's the same. So if you're called Marianne, you're not Mary, you're not Anne, you're Marianne. And so I asked a few people with such complex names, sporadically. So I don't have any quantification here. But I asked them if they would react to parts of their name. And they said no. So if your name is Rosemary, then you will not react to Rose because you feel it's not you who's meant at that party.
Yeah, I agree. Unless you happen to go by that nickname, and nicknames can also be quite the serious matter, because for example, when someone writes you a check, if they do that anymore, well, I suppose it still happens in some contexts, then they have to actually write your name on the check, and so. Can they write a nickname? And it seems that the bank, at least when I was there, the bank has like certain nicknames that they consider acceptable. So for example, the example they gave me is there's a person called Nicholas, and you write the check to Nick. Perfectly fine. Nick is a totally standard nickname for Nicholas. But they had a person named Nicholas who liked to go by Cole. Cole is not a standard nickname for Nicholas. I've never heard it. It's quite creative. But they said if you were to address the check to Cole, it would not be accepted because it's not an accepted nickname. It's a different name altogether. And that's just an arbitrary decision that the banks have made for the purposes of doing their business. So, so nicknames can be quite the science. And in the Russian tradition, they actually have a formula for creating nicknames, which I do not fully understand. But that's how, like, Alexander, the nickname for Alexander will be Sasha, right? So, but I don't know how they formulate it, but it's quite fascinating.
Oh, I mean, and Sasha, again, I mean, it's a fascinating name because Sasha can be both male and female.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also spelled in different ways. And names are really fascinating. And I mean, like, in the case of Sasha, for example, in German, you would typically spell it with an SCH, but then of course in English it's spelled with an SH in the middle. But I mean, if we just return to those things like the hyphens and the spaces, I mean, spelling your complex name as a single word, like Anne-Marie or Marianne, for example, it seems that this is not done with all the names. So there seems to be a certain limit on it. For example, I suppose if your name was Malcolm Christopher, you would rarely want to spell that as a single name just because it's very, very long. For example, another reason might be that in all the names that we just discussed, where you could have the spelling as a single word, there's one part which is very common, like Mary or Anne or Hans. So if you look at it like that, then again, I mean, the names are a bit like compounds. I worked on the spelling of English compounds, so we did an episode on that, and there I also introduced the system that can be used to spell compounds, which is very strongly based on length. So length and frequency are very important principles here too. It seems for names, not just for compounds.
Oh yeah, definitely. If the name is too long, you wouldn't spell it as a single. It would look quite strange.
It would look very strange, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why typically when you have a compound that has, that is a noun and that has more than 2 syllables, then you would actually spell it with a space. And so that's something which also works very well with the names. So I tested that in a publication that I made, and that also worked out very well.
Yeah, excellent. Christina, didn't you have a funny story one time about a professor at a university who you confused because of the way his name was spelled?
Yes, indeed. So when I was still working at LMU Munich, the professor I worked with was Hans-Jörg Schmid, and he was a linguistics professor. And one day I got an email that invited me to a lecture, and I was very surprised that it was about theology. But then I noticed that actually this was from a different Hans-Jörg Schmid, and one of them spelled his name with a hyphen and the other one didn't. And they were both working at the same university at the time. So it's very funny because in some cases you create a minimal pair. So the only difference that you can find in the spelling between the two is the hyphen. So it's crucial there.
There was a brief moment when you read that email where you thought he had undergone some kind of a radical career change.
No, not necessarily. Probably just that he's interested in so many things that he also talks about theology. Just like, in this podcast, we touch upon a lot of different topics because almost anything is related to linguistics.
Yes, perhaps he was a veritable Renaissance man. I appreciate that perspective. Well, when it comes to names and trying to tell each other apart, I think it can be quite common for maybe celebrities or famous people. If you have a name which is the same or really similar to another famous person, then you want to make sure you differentiate yourself. So an example I can think of is you have Michael Jordan, the basketball player, maybe the greatest basketball player of all time. He and I have the same birthday, by the way. Right?
Ooh.
Very happy to say that. And then there's an actor, Michael B. Jordan. No relation, but he has the name Michael Jordan. So obviously, if you had just went by his name, Michael Jordan, it'd be way too confusing. So he goes by Michael B. Jordan. And I think this is actually somewhat common if you have a middle name to try and use your middle initial, or maybe even invent a middle initial. Christina, I think there's an actor who's near and dear to both of us who completely invented his middle initial.
Well, yeah, Michael J. Fox. So actually, his middle name was or is Andrew.
Yeah.
And so Michael A. Fox, well, he believed that sounded a bit strange. So he rather wanted to use the middle initial of his favorite author, Michael J. Pollard. And that's what he did. And that's how he became the famous Michael J. Fox that, well, we all love.
When I think of middle initials, one of the more famous American presidents was Harry S. Truman, and the S actually doesn't stand for anything. Pulling here from Wikipedia, it says his middle initial S is not an abbreviation of one particular name. Rather, it honors both his grandfathers, Anderson Shipp Truman and Solomon Young, a somewhat common practice in the American South at the time. So whenever you see his name spelled out, Harry S. Truman, there's a dot on the S, but you could argue that it's not necessary because it's not a shortening of anything.
Ooh, that's interesting.
His middle name is S.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a middle name, so I can't say too much about middle names. But the thing is, very often you need them to distinguish yourself from others. That's very important in academia too. So particularly when both your first name and your family name are very common, then of course you want to find a way of differentiating yourself from others, and then the middle name can come in handy. But actually, my name Sanchez-Stockhammer, I mean, it's quite special, and I think I'm really the only person in the world with this particular name. So, yeah, no need for a middle name in hindsight.
Right, because it's your father's family name and your husband's name. Right. Yeah,
that's right. But of course, the interesting thing is that this reflects my identity very well because, as you know, I mean, I'm German, but I also have a Spanish family, so from my father, and so I think this combination is very nice because it reflects exactly who I am. You know, the combination of these different, cultural aspects, linguistic aspects, and of course. Well, I suppose growing up as a bilingual has made me a linguist because that has always made me very aware of languages around me. And yeah, that's why I'm here talking to you about language.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think it was already kind of in keeping with the tradition that you already had, right? Because before you already had two family names, right? And so this was, you just swapped one out to show like that you belong to these two different families.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in Germany, you can't have three family names. And since I already had two following the Spanish tradition, when I got married, I actually also wanted to take on my husband's name. And so that's the thing. So usually these complex family names, they either mean that you belong to two families, namely your father's and your mother's, or that you belong to the family where you come from and your spouse's. So just different ways of showing that it's a combination.
Oh yeah, makes sense to me. And quite a beautiful tradition, I might say.
Absolutely.
It seemed to me that, well, for some of my Latino friends, that sometimes for the sake of brevity, they might just go by their father's family name, but officially they have two.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, particularly when it's confusing. And I mean, as a child, I also just used one surname because otherwise people would have thought I was married and they would have been confused. Of course, no hyphen there, but still confusing. But so these complex second names, which are so common in Spanish or that we have in German when you get married, well, they also exist in English, but I don't think they're so common there, right?
Not too common, but not unheard of.
Yeah, for example, if you think about the comedian Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, and he also has a cousin, Simon Baron Cohen, and actually Sacha Baron Cohen spells his name with a space and Simon Baron Cohen with a hyphen. So it seems that these composite English surnames, they can actually choose between the different spellings, but actually they are not very common in general. But I mean, combined family names like those in German and Spanish, etc., they are also again a bit like a compound. So in that case, a copulative compound, like a singer-songwriter, because if you're a singer-songwriter, then you're a singer and a songwriter at the same time.
Yeah. Or a writer-director.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in that case, I mean, if someone asked you, are you a singer? You would say yes. Are you a songwriter? Yes. And so it's the same with the family names. So if I go out, I mean, sometimes people will just use part of my names depending on where I am because they might be unaware of the long name that I have, and I will react to either. So in that case, that's different from the Mary Ann because Mary Ann will feel this is not okay. She's really Mary Ann and not Mary or Ann. But I mean, I will react to both Sanchez and Stockhammer because I'm part of those two families. And I also asked a few other people who are in a similar situation, and they said it was the same thing for them. So superficially, it looks like the same thing. It's complex names, but whether it's a first name or a family name makes a big difference regarding your identification with the whole.
Yeah, that is cool, Christina. I like how you're connecting these names to just kind of compounds in general, and how in some ways some of the same rules apply, at least in terms of how we view these things. If it's one single concept or if it's two concepts, it's totally fascinating. I never thought about this before, but it's often the case on the podcast where you inspire me to think about something I had never considered before.
Oh, that's very sweet. I'm glad.
Yeah.
You too, by the way.
Excellent. I that's what I aim to do.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Okay, Christina. So we've discussed given names, or first names as I would call it. We've discussed family names or last names as I would call it. Maybe you would call it a surname. So it's endlessly confusing, all these different words for these names. What about just the full name in its entirety? What about full names?
Like Elvis Presley or Dominic Piazza. Yeah, well, if you look at the linguistic literature, then these are not really considered compounds. So for that reason, I wouldn't want to go into detail here, but still what I find interesting is that if you think about the film Bridget Jones, for example, I don't know if you've seen Bridget Jones's Diary.
I haven't.
As a film.
I haven't. Tell me about it.
Okay. Well, but I mean, so the main character, I mean, you can either refer to her as Bridget, but then sometimes her boss will just call her Jones, and that is the kind of tradition, I think, that sometimes people are just referred to by their surname as well, and okay, it's the same person, but yeah, so no, these don't belong into the categories that I was looking at, but still they're interesting, of course.
Yes. I had a history teacher in high school whom I loved very, very much. Well, formally we would call him Mr. Grek, but he said that all his life he just understood that he was Grek, and so he allowed us to just call him Grek, which under normal circumstances, to refer to someone above you just by their last name, it could be considered really disrespectful and rude. But he specifically gave us permission to do it. So often we would just call him Greg.
Yeah, and I think there's like different contexts in which people use the surname. And I mean, sometimes among young people, you will also do that as a nickname, at least in Germany. So you might just call someone Müller, and that's actually the surname, but friends might use that to refer to a teenager's name.
Yeah, it also sounds a bit military to me, because typically in the military, the officer above you will refer to you by your family name, and your family name will be on your uniform. Actually, in my time observing military personnel just interacting with each other and talking to each other, often they'll call each other by their family names. They don't have to, but I think they do it, one, because they're so used to it, and two, because maybe it shows that they're part of an in-group, right?
Yeah. And so again, I mean, names are absolutely fascinating. And the important thing is that you know that people mean you when they use that particular name. So it could be your first name, could be your last name, could be a combination, but it could also just be a nickname.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I think I had an English teacher in high school who, when he was angry, would refer to us by our last names. Yeah.
Oh.
Piazza. I usually wasn't, if I heard that, I would not be looking forward to what comes next. So
it's very interesting. So when I was a child, I read quite a lot of novels that have been translated, I think. And I always found it very strange when there was a situation where the parents, when they called their child and were angry, they were actually using the combination of first name and surname. So in that case, Dominic Piazza, come here immediately.
That's right. That's a classic.
Is that something?
That's
because
a classic.
I think in German it's not a thing.
But and usually it's the full name too. So middle name as well. And if there's more than one middle name, they'll even, it's the full name. That's a classic. That's a classic meme. If your parent calls out to you by your full name in an angry tone, that means you are in big trouble.
So either it means I've never been in big trouble from my parents, or it's not a thing in German, nor in Spanish.
Very funny. Very funny. I got to look into this.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about, these combinations of first name and last name and possibly even middle names is that there's always spaces in between. So there is no variation. So it's less interesting from that perspective of spelling. At least in the Western tradition, this is how it's spelled using the Latin alphabet.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. Yeah, we at least agree. That the given name and the family name and the middle name should be delineated, demarcated, separated from each other. That is very true. So perhaps less interesting, but nevertheless, it's been so much fun to talk about names and the way they're spelled. And people can be quite particular about, when it comes to their name. It's a big part of their identity. So if someone if their name is spelled in a less common way, then they're very used to it being misspelled. And if you spelled their name correctly, it might show that you actually cared, to learn something about them. And our names and the way they're spelled can actually, it can have a really big social impact, bigger than you might expect.
Absolutely. And not just the letters that you use, but also whether you use a hyphen or not. And if you're called Annalena and people constantly put a space there or a hyphen where they shouldn't, then you might feel that they don't really know you well enough, because if they did know you well enough, or if they cared about you, then they would actually use that. So, my plea would be to also look at those tiny little distinctions there, because as we saw in the example of Hans-Jörg Schmid, sometimes it's a completely different person that you're referring to.
Oh, totally. I totally agree. Yeah, people pay attention. If you make some spelling mistakes in your writing, they might not notice, but if you spell their name wrong, they almost certainly will notice. So these things matter. Well, Christina, we did a very good job today of covering the full spectrum of names for people. But of course, many other things have names. Buildings have names. Books have names. Movies have names. Podcasts have names.
Yes, they do. And this podcast has a name too.
You're exactly right.
So stay curious. Have fun with language.
And join us next time on Linguistics Behind the Scenes.